Intrigued by her husband Mackenzie's unusual behavior toward her mother, Samantha decided to test a suspicion that had been gnawing at her. Claiming she would be working late, she returned home unannounced. Entering quietly, she froze in place, stunned to see Mackenzie locked in a passionate kiss with her own mother-in-law. But that moment, as devastating as it was just the tip of the iceberg of a truth Samantha had never imagined she would face. The sun was slowly setting over Houston, casting golden hues through the windows of the brick house. Samantha turned the key in the door, breathing in the familiar scent of the home she had shared with Mackenzie for nearly 7 years. The low hum of the television echoed from the living room. There he was, sunk into the couch with a tablet in his hands, seemingly focused on a project. She smiled as she stepped inside, the weight of her shift still heavy on her shoulders. But Mackenzie's expression remained unchanged. "Hi, love," she said, trying to hide the slight sting of disappointment when he murmured something indistinct in response without even looking at her. Samantha set her bag on the console table and headed to the bedroom, where she took off her white coat, still carrying the scent of the hospital. It was a smell she associated as much with life as with death, but also with her passion for caring for people. The exhausting routine didn't bother her. What did was the growing silence between her and Mackenzie, a void that seemed to widen with each passing day. In the kitchen, while preparing a cup of tea, she heard his footsteps in the hallway. She glanced at her husband over her shoulder as he entered, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Was work okay?" she asked, trying to spark a conversation. "Yeah, just really busy lately," he replied flatly, closing the fridge and leaving before she could say anything more. Samantha sighed, holding the warm cup in her hands. It felt as though he was there, but at the same time distant, unreachable. In that moment, she recalled a recent conversation with her mother, Susan. Over dinner, Susan had said something that seemed trivial at the time, but now gnawed at her. "Mackenzie's been so dedicated to his work. You're lucky to have a man like him." She shook her head, trying to push away the rising unease. Susan was a devoted mother, always ready to offer advice, but sometimes it seemed like she knew more about Mackenzie than Samantha did. In the days that followed, Susan began to show up more often, something Samantha hadn't noticed before. Sometimes she brought cakes or flowers, always justifying her visits with some pretext. One afternoon, Samantha arrived home earlier than expected and found Mackenzie and Susan in the kitchen, laughing at what seemed to be an inside joke. "Hey, what are you two plotting?" Samantha teased, though the discomfort in her voice was evident even to her. "Nothing much, just reminiscing about old stories," Susan answered quickly, while Mackenzie smiled and looked away. It was the kind of moment she might have ignored months ago, but now it felt like there was more to it. It wasn't exactly jealousy. It was more like intuition, an unsettling feeling she couldn't quite explain. One evening, as Samantha was in the bedroom folding clothes, she heard muffled laughter coming from the living room. Susan was there again, and Mackenzie seemed more relaxed with her than he had been with Samantha in weeks. When she went downstairs, they abruptly stopped talking as if caught red-handed. "Some kind of secret?" Samantha asked, half joking, half serious. "Of course not, dear," Susan replied with a smile. It was impossible to ignore the condescending tone in her mother's words. Samantha forced a smile, but felt her chest tighten. While washing the dishes after dinner, she found a lipstick in Susan's purse, a deep red shade she didn't remember seeing before. She picked up the small object and held it up, catching her mother's attention. "I like this color. Is it new?" Susan hesitated for a brief second before smiling broadly. "Yes, I bought it a few days ago. Thought it would suit me." "And it does," Samantha said, but something about her mother's expression felt forced. The doubts began to take shape in her mind. They built up in small but significant moments, like how Mackenzie seemed more attentive when Susan was around, or how she laughed at his jokes. That night, lying in bed next to Mackenzie, Samantha stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. He was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. The silence in the room was almost deafening. She looked at the wedding ring on her hand, remembering the day Mackenzie had placed it on her finger, promising love and fidelity. But now that symbol felt cold, meaningless. Samantha closed her eyes, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. Maybe it was just exhaustion, she thought. Maybe she was being paranoid, but an inner voice insisted otherwise. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and she feared that discovering what it was might change her life forever. The days followed a pattern Samantha could no longer ignore. Mackenzie now seemed busier than ever, leaving before dawn and returning late at night. Endless meetings and tight deadlines had become his usual explanations. Samantha, accustomed to his dedication to work, tried to believe it was just a phase. However, the repetition of these excuses, coupled with his increasingly absent demeanor, fueled a growing unease. One Sunday, as she prepared breakfast, she felt lonelier than ever. Mackenzie's chair was empty. He had left early, claiming he needed to review a project before the week began. She sat at the table with a mug of coffee, watching the steam rise like slow, melancholic smoke. She remembered when Sundays had been different, filled with laughter, conversations about the future, and the smell of burnt pancakes, because Mackenzie insisted on making them. Now everything felt cold. Susan arrived mid-morning, as she had been doing frequently in recent weeks. She brought a freshly baked cake and a smile that felt rehearsed. "Alone again? Mackenzie is always so busy, isn't he?" Susan commented, setting the cake on the counter. Samantha only nodded in response. There was something unsettling about the way Susan spoke, as if she knew more than she let on. Her mother busied herself slicing the cake and began asking casual questions. "How's work? And you and Mackenzie? Any trips planned?" "We're fine. Just a bit busier, I think," Samantha replied, trying not to sound irritated. Susan gave a small smile. "He's a dedicated man. You have to understand that. Don't let small things ruin what you have." Samantha narrowed her eyes. It was the second time Susan had said something like that, as if making an effort to defend him against an accusation Samantha hadn't even made. In the weeks that followed, Susan's visits became almost daily. Samantha began to wonder if her mother had a specific agenda, but could never find a plausible justification. Susan claimed she was there to help or keep her company, but she often seemed more interested in talking with Mackenzie than with her. During one such visit, Samantha came downstairs to find the two of them in the living room, laughing. Mackenzie seemed more relaxed than she had seen him in months. He had set aside his tablet, a rarity, and was leaning forward, listening intently as Susan told a story Samantha couldn't quite hear. When she entered the room, both of them looked at her quickly, and the conversation stopped. "Some kind of secret?" Samantha asked, trying to sound casual. "Not at all, dear," Susan replied with a smile. Mackenzie just shook his head and stood up, muttering something about getting water. It was strange. Since when did they have so much in common? Susan had always been an important figure in her life, but she had never involved herself so directly in their marriage. The feeling of being a stranger in her own home began to weigh on Samantha. One afternoon, while folding clothes in the bedroom, Samantha heard a low conversation coming from the living room. She crept down a few stairs, trying to listen without being noticed. She couldn't catch all the words, but Susan's laughter rang out clearly. It wasn't the laughter of a casual mother. It was an intimate sound, full of complicity, that made Samantha's heart race uncomfortably. Later that night, she tried to talk to Mackenzie about his behavior. "You've been spending a lot of time away, Mac. Is everything okay?" she asked, feeling the tension in the air. He was sitting on the couch, balancing his tablet on his knees. He looked up briefly before glancing away again. "It's just work, Sam. You know how it is." "I do, but it feels like you're pulling away." "I don't know. It's like something's different." He sighed, closing the tablet. "Look, I'm sorry if it seems like I'm distant. I'm just exhausted. I promise things will get better." Despite his words, Samantha felt it wasn't enough. There was something more, something he wasn't saying. The next morning, Susan arrived just as Mackenzie was leaving for work. He paused at the door to chat with her, the two exchanging a smile that seemed uncomfortably natural. Samantha watched from a distance, unnoticed, her heart heavy with doubt. Later, while tidying the kitchen, Samantha picked up her phone and called Susan, hoping to clear the air. "Mom, is there something you want to tell me?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but with tension in her voice. "I don't know what you're talking about, dear. Is everything okay with you? I guess it's just that you and Mackenzie, you've been so close lately." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Samantha, you're imagining things. Don't worry about it. Maybe you just need to rest more." It was as if Susan's words poured gasoline on the fire. Samantha hung up the phone, feeling even more confused and anxious. She began to question her own perception. Was she being paranoid? Was the stress of work and life distorting her view? But deep down, something told her it wasn't just her imagination. Something was wrong, something she could no longer ignore. Samantha spent the entire week with her mind racing, trying to balance long shifts at the hospital, and the growing sense that something terrible was happening. Susan's words echoed in her head like a toxic mantra. "You're imagining things." Yet, every detail that surfaced seemed to contradict that claim. Mackenzie's behavior, Susan's frequent visits, the muffled laughter, they all screamed that something was wrong. Samantha knew she could no longer ignore it. On Friday night, while reviewing her shift schedule, she had an idea. She swapped her night shift with a colleague, ensuring she would be home without telling anyone. It was risky, but Samantha felt it was the only way to dispel or confirm the doubts tormenting her. She arrived at the hospital at her usual time, put on her uniform, and headed to the break room. After 30 minutes, she made a quick excuse to her supervisor and returned home. The drive was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the rapid thudding of her heart. As she parked on the street in front of the house, she saw that the living room lights were on. The sight, which should have been comforting, only made her more apprehensive. Samantha entered through the back door, which Mackenzie often forgot to lock. She passed through the dark kitchen, the familiar scent of jasmine from the diffuser she had placed there days earlier lingering in the air. Everything seemed normal, yet there was a tension so thick it was almost tangible. Walking slowly down the hallway, she heard muffled voices coming from the living room. It wasn't unusual for Mackenzie and Susan to talk, but the intimacy of their tones was different this time. Samantha froze as she approached, peeking through the gap in the slightly open door. There on the couch she and Mackenzie had picked out together in their first year of marriage was her mother, Susan, her hair loose and a smile on her face that Samantha had never seen in this context. Mackenzie was leaning toward her, his hands resting on Susan's waist as the two shared a kiss. Not a casual or innocent kiss, but something deep, filled with desire. The shock was instantaneous and paralyzing. Samantha felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The air seemed to vanish from her lungs, and for a brief moment she couldn't breathe. Everything around her blurred except for the sight of Mackenzie and Susan, completely oblivious to her presence. She wasn't sure exactly when or how she took her first step into the room, but suddenly she was there, standing and staring at them. "What is this?" Her voice came out shaky, but it was laden with pain. Mackenzie and Susan jolted apart. Susan clutched her chest, her face pale with surprise, while Mackenzie seemed to struggle to find words. "Samantha, it's not what you think," he began, but the sentence died in his throat under her glare. "Not what I think," she repeated, her voice rising in both volume and emotion. "Then tell me what it is. Explain it to me, Mackenzie, because from where I'm standing, it looks like my husband and my mother were—" Her voice faltered before she could finish, but the silence in the room spoke louder than any words could. Susan stood, trying to regain her composure. "Samantha, sweetheart, we can explain—" "Don't call me sweetheart," Samantha shouted, backing away as tears began streaming down her face. "You were my mother, I trusted you, and you did this to me." Mackenzie tried to approach her, but she raised a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't you dare touch me. You're both monsters." "How could you do this?" The room felt stifling, suffocating. Every word felt like a blade, but at the same time, Samantha knew that nothing she could say would fully express what she was feeling. Pain, rage, humiliation, all of it swirled together in an uncontrollable storm. Mackenzie tried to justify his actions, speaking quickly as if words could erase what had happened. "Our marriage was strained. You were always busy with the hospital, and I felt alone. Susan was there and—" "Alone?" Samantha interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. "You weren't alone, Mackenzie. You had me. You always had me. And instead of telling me how you felt, you chose the dirtiest, most selfish thing you could do." She turned to Susan, who remained silent, her eyes cast downward. "And you? Do you have anything to say?" Susan lifted her gaze, but there was no remorse in her expression, only a coldness Samantha had never seen before. "There's no point in dragging this out, Samantha. You know your marriage was never perfect. Mackenzie needed something you weren't giving him." Those words were the breaking point. Samantha marched to the front door, flung it open, and pointed outside. "Get out, both of you. Now." Mackenzie hesitated. "Samantha, please, get out," she screamed, her voice echoing through the house. Susan was the first to leave, smoothing her hair as though this were some trivial event. Mackenzie followed, pausing at the doorway as if about to say something, but Samantha's glare silenced him. and he walked out without another word. When the door finally closed, silence enveloped the house. Samantha slid to the floor, tears streaming freely as the magnitude of the betrayal overwhelmed her. Her mother, her husband, two pillars of her life had crumbled, leaving her in ruins. And in that moment, all that remained was the unbearable pain of shattered trust. Samantha felt as if the air around her had become an unbearable weight. She sat in the same spot where, hours earlier, she had confronted Mackenzie and Susan. The house was cloaked in silence, but inside her, there was chaos. Everything felt wrong, from the sofa, now tainted with corrupted memories, to the pictures on the walls which no longer radiated the joy that had once filled her home. She remained on the living room floor, her face streaked with tears and her body immobilized by emotional exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, the scene replayed vividly. Susan's smile, the closeness between her and Mackenzie, the kiss that had shattered everything Samantha believed to be solid in her life. Unbidden memories began to flood her mind. She was back on her wedding day, walking toward Mackenzie at the altar, with Susan by her side. Her mother had held her hand firmly and whispered, "You look beautiful, my love. This will be the happiest day of your life." That moment, once one of her most cherished memories, now felt like a cruel farce. Other flashbacks followed. The anniversary dinner Susan had insisted on preparing for them, saying she wanted to celebrate their love. Or the time Mackenzie had brought her flowers, after an especially difficult shift, claiming Susan had reminded him how much Samantha deserved to be appreciated. In hindsight, every gesture felt laced with bitter irony, as though she had been the only one unaware of the truth. The sound of her phone pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Susan's name flashing. Her first instinct was to hurl the phone against the wall, but instead, she answered. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice dry and low. "Samantha, I wanted to talk to you. It doesn't have to be now, but we need to discuss what happened," Susan said, her voice calm, almost controlled. "There's nothing to discuss. You betrayed my trust in a way I didn't even think was possible. There's no excuse for what you did." "It wasn't that simple," Susan began, but Samantha cut her off. "Simple? You destroyed the one thing I thought could never be broken, our relationship as mother and daughter." Susan was silent for a moment, and Samantha hung up without waiting for a response. Shortly after, Mackenzie also tried to reach out. The next morning, he showed up at the door, his eyes puffy and his expression seemingly remorseful. Samantha saw him through the peephole, hesitated for a moment, and opened the door. "What do you want?" she asked, crossing her arms as she faced him. "I want to explain," he began, but Samantha raised her hand to stop him. "Explain what, Mackenzie? That you chose the one person who should have been my greatest ally to betray me, that you not only broke our marriage, but shattered my faith in people." Mackenzie took a deep breath as if trying to find the right words. "I didn't plan this, Sam. It just happened. We were going through a rough time, and Don't tell me it was a mistake, Mackenzie. It was a choice, a conscious choice." Her voice was filled with pain, but a note of resolve was beginning to emerge. "I still care about you," he said, attempting to touch her hand, but she pulled away. "You don't have the right to say that now. I want you to leave, and if you have any respect for me at all, you'll stay away." He hesitated, but eventually turned and left, leaving Samantha alone once more. In the silence that followed, something began to shift within her. There was anger, yes, but also the flicker of something deeper, a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She looked around the house, taking in every detail with a new perspective. The home that had once been a sanctuary now felt like the scene of an emotional crime. Yet, even as the pain threatened to suffocate her, she knew she couldn't let it define her. Samantha stood up, wiping the tears from her face. She went to the bedroom and began removing Mackenzie's belongings from the closet, throwing them into a disordered pile on the floor. With every piece of clothing she discarded, she felt a little freer, as though reclaiming control over her own life. When she finished, she grabbed a suitcase and began packing away the objects that reminded her of the happy moments she'd shared with Mackenzie. She didn't know what she would do with them yet, but one thing was certain: they could no longer remain in the house. As the day wore on, Samantha realized she was exhausted, but not defeated. She had been betrayed in the most cruel and intimate way, but that didn't mean she was weak. For the first time since her life had unraveled, she felt a glimmer of determination. She walked to the hallway mirror and stared at her reflection. Her face was marked by tears, her eyes still red, but there was a spark of something new in her expression. She would not be a victim, not anymore. It was time to fight, for herself, for her dignity, and for whatever was left of her life. Without breaking eye contact with her reflection, she murmured to herself, "This will not destroy me." The decision to fight came as a survival instinct. Samantha knew she couldn't let Mackenzie and Susan's betrayal consume her completely. The morning after the confrontation, after a sleepless night, she called a friend from the hospital who had recently gone through a divorce and asked for recommendations for matrimonial lawyers. She got a referral and, without hesitation, scheduled a consultation. The lawyer's office was in a commercial building in downtown Houston, with glass walls reflecting the city's bright light. As Samantha entered the waiting room, she felt a knot in her stomach. It was as if she were officially admitting that her marriage was over, but it was a necessary step. The receptionist called her name, and she was led to a spacious, minimalist office where a middle-aged man named Thomas Grayson greeted her with a firm handshake. His eyes were sharp and his voice carried a reassuring authority. "Samantha, before we begin, I want you to know that anything you share here will be treated with the utmost confidentiality. I'm here to help you find the best path forward." Samantha recounted everything, from the early signs of Mackenzie's growing distance to the devastating discovery of the affair. Thomas listened quietly, taking occasional notes. When she finished, he folded his hands on the desk and spoke. "First, I'm sorry you're going through this. Betrayal, especially in these circumstances, is a profound blow. But I want you to know that you have rights, and we will ensure they are upheld." Mackenzie mentioned a few times about investments and accounts he managed on his own. "I don't know if he was hiding something, but..." She hesitated, unsure of what it all meant. "That's something we can investigate," Thomas said with confidence. "I'll need details about his finances, shared accounts, and any transactions you can recall. We'll file for divorce and request full disclosure of his assets. If there's anything hidden, we'll find it." His words were a balm. For the first time in days, Samantha felt she wasn't completely alone. In the days that followed, Samantha threw herself into preparing for the case. She searched through old documents, bank statements, and reviewed every detail of their shared finances. Each item she unearthed brought back memories of their marriage, some happy, others painful, but she forced herself to keep moving forward. It was a difficult process, but also therapeutic, as if each paper she organized helped her reclaim a part of herself. Meanwhile, Susan attempted to reach out. First, there were texts, short and insistent. Then, phone calls Samantha refused to answer. Finally, Susan showed up at her door. Samantha opened it with a cold expression, maintaining her composure even as her mother's voice took on a pleading tone. "Samantha, please, we need to talk." "There's nothing left to say to each other," Samantha replied, crossing her arms. "I know I made a mistake, but I'm your mother. I don't want to lose you," Susan said, her eyes glistening with tears, though Samantha remained unmoved. "You made that choice, Mom. You chose to betray me in the most cruel way imaginable. Don't come here expecting me to forget or forgive that." Susan stepped forward, reaching for her daughter's hand, but Samantha stepped back. "I trusted you. I confided in you about what I was feeling in my marriage, and you used that against me," Samantha said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "I don't have room for you in my life right now." Susan didn't argue. Her face was a mix of regret and resignation as she turned and walked away. When Samantha shut the door, she felt a pang of guilt, but also relief. It was hard, but she needed to prioritize her own sanity. The weeks that followed were grueling. Thomas brought in a forensic accountant to analyze Mackenzie's finances, and what they uncovered was shocking. In addition to their regular accounts, Mackenzie had been funneling money into a separate account, skimming off portions of their shared investments. "He's been diverting funds into a personal account," Thomas explained during a meeting. "This is serious, Samantha. We can use this to argue for a more favorable division of assets." The revelation ignited something inside her. It wasn't just emotional betrayal, it was financial betrayal too. Each new discovery reinforced her resolve to fight, not just for justice, but for herself. As preparations for the case progressed, Samantha wrestled with internal dilemmas. In quiet moments, she wondered if all this effort was worth it. Would justice really make her feel better, or was it just a way to hold on to her anger? But when she remembered the look on Susan and Mackenzie's faces that night, her determination surged anew. This wasn't just about justice, it was about reclaiming her power. On the eve of the first court hearing, Samantha stayed up late reviewing documents and Thomas's guidance. When she finally went to bed, she stared at the ceiling and took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, she felt ready. The battle ahead would be difficult, but she wouldn't back down. The betrayal had tried to define her, but Samantha refused to be a victim. She was stronger than they had imagined, and now she was ready to prove it. To them, to the world, and most importantly, to herself. The courtroom was a cold, formal space, with beige walls that seemed to absorb any trace of emotion. Samantha sat beside Thomas, her attorney, feeling the weight of every glance that landed on her. On one side, Mackenzie, impeccably dressed, wore a neutral expression, as if trying to project control. Beside him sat Susan. Seeing her mother there, aligned with Mackenzie, was an unexpected blow. Susan's face was serious, but Samantha recognized the posture. It was that of someone preparing to manipulate the narrative in her favor. The judge entered, and everyone rose. As the proceedings began, the reality of the moment hit Samantha like an avalanche. This wasn't just a trial about assets or betrayal. It was a public unraveling of everything that had gone wrong in her life. Thomas wasted no time presenting the financial evidence. With the help of the forensic accountant, he laid out Mackenzie's misappropriation of funds, highlighting how he had siphoned money from their joint accounts without Samantha's knowledge. "These are the statements showing regular transfers to a personal account unknown to my client," Thomas stated, placing the documents in clear view of the judge. Mackenzie looked uncomfortable, but maintained his composure. When his attorney had the chance to respond, he attempted to downplay the findings, suggesting that the money had been allocated for joint investments. "There was no ill intent on my part. These funds were directed towards something that would benefit both of us in the future," he declared firmly. Samantha clenched her fists, suppressing her anger. It was a blatant lie, but Mackenzie's tone was convincing. Next, Susan took the stand. As she approached the witness chair, Samantha felt a mix of anxiety and disbelief. What could her mother possibly say that wouldn't make things worse? Susan began with a controlled, almost maternal tone, as if trying to position herself as the victim of a misunderstanding. "My daughter and I have always had a close relationship, but in recent years I noticed she was distant," Susan said, pausing strategically. "When Mackenzie started confiding in me about his struggles in their marriage, it was only natural for me to support him." "And do you think betraying your daughter was part of that support?" Thomas asked bluntly. Susan hesitated, her face hardening. "I'm not here to justify what happened, but Samantha and Mackenzie were in a marriage that had already fallen apart. I was simply there when no one else was." The weight of her words fell on Samantha like a cold blade. Susan wasn't just admitting her betrayal, she was attempting to justify it at Samantha's expense. The cynicism was palpable, and Samantha's heart ached at the lengths her mother was willing to go to protect her own image. When it was Samantha's turn to testify, she felt the gaze of Susan and Mackenzie on her, but refused to flinch. "I built my life alongside Mackenzie, believing he was an honest man, a true partner. I trusted him, just as I trusted my mother," Samantha said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "Their betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate choice that destroyed everything I thought was safe in my life." She paused, looking directly at Mackenzie and then at Susan. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I deserve justice." The silence in the courtroom was heavy, and Samantha felt tears burn in her eyes, but she held firm. She wouldn't let them see her vulnerability as weakness. On the second day of the trial, Thomas brought an unexpected witness, one of Mackenzie's colleagues, who revealed that Mackenzie had used the diverted funds to finance trips and private meetings. He said he needed time away from his wife, that their marriage wasn't what it used to be. The revelation caused a stir in the room, but the final blow came when Thomas presented messages exchanged between Mackenzie and Susan, recovered from an old phone. The conversations left no doubt about their involvement, showing that instead of trying to fix the marriage, they had conspired against Samantha. When the judge delivered the ruling, Samantha could barely focus. Mackenzie was ordered to repay the misappropriated funds and cover the legal costs. Susan's role was mentioned only briefly, but the impact of her betrayal was already etched into Samantha's soul. Outside the courthouse, Thomas gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You got what you wanted?" Justice was served. Samantha nodded, but the emptiness lingered. The legal victory didn't erase the pain. It didn't bring back the years she had invested in Mackenzie, nor did it heal the deep wound Susan had left behind. She walked to her car, feeling the warm Houston breeze on her face. As she gazed at the horizon, she realized the courtroom had been just one battle. The real war, the one that involved rebuilding herself, was still ahead. And despite everything, Samantha knew she would fight to the end. The days following the court's decision were a mix of relief and disorientation. Samantha moved through her routine as if on autopilot, unable to fully grasp her victory. The financial restitution and the moral condemnation of Mackenzie and Susan felt insignificant compared to the emptiness she still carried. The house, though now hers alone, seemed to echo with memories. The sofa where Mackenzie and Susan had been caught, the kitchen that had once been the center of countless conversations and laughter, the bedroom that had once been a haven of intimacy, everything felt tainted. Every corner whispered reminders she didn't want to revisit, but that insisted on creeping into her thoughts. One night, while staring at the boxes she had begun packing without knowing their destination, Samantha felt a wave of despair. It was as though the air around her had grown too heavy, suffocating. A wedding photo in a frame slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. She sat amidst the mess, clutching the broken pieces of the frame. The tears came, not restrained but in an overwhelming torrent. For the first time since it all began, Samantha allowed herself to feel the full depth of her pain. She didn't try to be strong, rationalize, or console herself. She simply cried, emptying out everything that had been holding her down. Minutes stretched on until the sobbing gave way to silence. Sitting on the cold floor, Samantha felt a strange sense of clarity. The court had been a battle, but not the end of the war. Her greatest struggle wasn't against Mackenzie or Susan. It was against what she had lost of herself throughout this ordeal. She rose slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She needed to leave, not just the house, but Houston. She needed a place where she could breathe again, away from the ghosts haunting every street, every corner, every memory. In the days that followed, Samantha searched for small coastal towns, looking for something that promised simplicity and a fresh start. When she found a quiet town by the coast, with tree-lined streets and a tranquil beach, she felt a spark of hope. There wasn't much there. Some cafes, small shops, and the ocean. It was exactly what she needed. With her decision made, Samantha began letting go of everything she didn't want to take with her. She donated furniture, sold items too emotionally charged to carry, and kept only the essentials. Each object she left behind felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. On the day of her departure, Samantha made a point not to look back. The car was packed with boxes and suitcases, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. As she crossed the last bridge leaving Houston behind, she felt as though she could finally breathe. When she arrived in the new town, she parked in front of a small house she had hastily rented. It was simple, with a wooden porch that overlooked a quiet street. After unloading her things and arranging the basics, Samantha took a walk to the beach. The sound of the waves and the salty scent of the sea brought immediate relief. She slipped off her shoes and walked barefoot on the damp sand, feeling the cold water lap at her feet. She stopped for a moment, gazing at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. For the first time in a long while, Samantha felt it might be possible to start over. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined her. The ocean seemed to whisper promises of healing, and she was ready to listen. In that moment, under a fiery sky and the steady rhythm of the waves, Samantha found a glimmer of peace. It was only the beginning, but it was enough to make her believe that the fresh start she sought was finally within reach. The days in the small coastal town began simply. Samantha woke early to the sound of the waves and spent the first moments of the day sitting on her porch, watching the sun emerge through the clouds. The air there felt lighter, cleaner, as if each breath helped dissipate some of the weight she carried. Before long, a routine began to take shape. Samantha enrolled in a local cooking workshop where she met other residents. Among the laughter over recipes that didn't always turn out right, she began to feel something she hadn't in a long time: connection. To the others, she wasn't the betrayed woman or the dedicated nurse. She was just Samantha, a new friend, with a shy smile and a curious gaze. She also found a way to stabilize herself financially. During a walk through the town centre, she saw a small space for rent. The idea came almost immediately. To open a cafe. It was something she had always wanted to do, but never had the courage to pursue. Using the money left from the divorce and her savings, Samantha decided to take the leap. The cafe, named Mare Serena, Serene Tide, quickly became a community gathering spot. Samantha poured her heart into creating a welcoming space, with tables adorned with fresh flowers and the constant aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Working there, chatting with customers and experimenting with new recipes became a form of therapy. Each day felt like a small victory, proof that she could rebuild herself. Still, there were moments when the past haunted her. At night, when silence filled the house, flashes of what had happened returned. These weren't memories she invited, but she couldn't completely banish them either. One such night, she received the first message from Susan since her move. The text was brief but laden with emotion. "Samantha, I'm so sorry for what I did. I hope we can talk someday." She stared at the message for a long time, unsure how, or even if, she should respond. The next morning, as she prepared coffee behind the counter, a regular customer named Claire noticed that Samantha seemed distracted. "Are you okay?" Claire asked gently. Samantha hesitated before responding, but something about Claire's openness encouraged her to share. "My mother, she hurt me in a way I never thought possible. Now she wants reconciliation, but I don't know if I can." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "Forgiving someone is never for them, you know? It's for us. But it doesn't have to happen right away. You have the right to take all the time you need." Claire's words lingered in Samantha's thoughts over the following days. She wondered whether she was strong enough to forgive Susan and Mackenzie. Was forgiveness truly necessary to move on? Or was it a burden she would force herself to carry without being ready? One evening, while walking along the beach at sunset, Samantha stopped to watch the waves. The answers weren't easy, but in that moment she realized that forgiveness wasn't about granting absolution to others. It was about freeing the space that resentment occupied within her. When she returned home, she replied to Susan's message, keeping her words simple but firm. "I can't forgive you yet, and I may never be able to, but I hope you find peace with your choices, just as I'm trying to find peace with mine." As for Mackenzie, she had nothing left to say. He was part of a chapter she had closed. The forgiveness she sought, if it ever came, would be more for herself than for him. The next day at the cafe, Samantha added a new sign to the wall with the quote, "Some chapters don't need a happy ending to teach us what we need to learn." It was a reminder of her own journey and an invitation for anyone who entered to reflect on the lessons in their own lives. Over time, Samantha began to understand that while forgiveness wasn't immediate or complete, she had already made a far more important choice: self-love. As painful as the betrayal had been, it had led her to rediscover herself and create a new life where, at last, she was the protagonist. The sound of laughter in the cafe, the friendships she was forming, and the peaceful routine she had built were proof that Samantha hadn't just survived, she had thrived. And as she gazed at the ocean at the end of each day, she knew that even if forgiveness never came, peace was beginning to find her. The months that followed brought profound changes to Samantha's life. The routine at the cafe became a source of joy, not just as work, but as an expression of her independence. Among regular customers and new friends, she began building a support network that made her feel rooted in her new home. For the first time in a long while, Samantha looked at herself with pride. She was no longer a woman who depended on others to define her worth. The nights spent questioning the past still came now and then, but they were less frequent, less painful. She had learned to live with the pain without letting it dominate her. One morning, while sorting through paperwork for the cafe, Samantha received a letter. The envelope bore Susan's handwriting, recognizable even after months without contact. She opened it cautiously, knowing each word could be a knife or perhaps something gentler. "Samantha, I know that forgiveness is not something you owe me. I'm writing this letter because it's the only way I can express how deeply I regret what I've done. There are no excuses for my choices, only shame and remorse. I want you to know that my betrayal was never about you. It was about my own weakness, my inability to see the impact of my actions. I hope that one day you find something beyond hatred for me in your heart, even if we can never rebuild what was destroyed. All I wish is for you to continue flourishing and to find the happiness you deserve. With love, Susan." Samantha read the letter several times, The words seemed sincere, but there was no way to know if they came from genuine remorse or simply an attempt to ease Susan's guilt. She reflected on what she felt but realized the answer no longer mattered. Susan was right about one thing. Samantha owed her nothing. Instead of replying, Samantha placed the letter in a drawer, a space where she could revisit it if she ever wanted to. Her mother had made her choices, and Samantha had made hers. A few days later, an unexpected call from Mackenzie brought an echo of the past. His voice was hesitant, almost timid as he spoke. "Samantha, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I was hoping for a chance to talk, to try to explain." She interrupted him firmly, though without anger. "Mackenzie, there's nothing left to explain. What happened between us ended the moment you chose to betray my trust. I don't want to hold on to resentment, but I also don't want reconciliation. Please don't contact me again." There was a brief silence on the other end before Mackenzie murmured, "I'm sorry," and hung up. Samantha exhaled deeply, feeling a lightness she hadn't expected. It was as if, by closing that chapter with Mackenzie, she was finally freeing herself from any ties that might still bind her to the past. That evening, as she walked along the beach, Samantha reflected on all she had learned. Mackenzie and Susan's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the catalyst for a rebirth she never imagined possible. She had learned that trusting others began with trusting herself, and that her strength didn't come from avoiding pain, but from facing it head-on. The sound of the waves seemed to harmonize with her thoughts. She gazed at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. She felt at peace, not because she had forgotten the past, but because she had finally found a place for it within herself. Samantha returned to her home, where new photos were beginning to fill the empty spaces on the walls. They were images of happy moments with friends she had made in the town, milestones at the cafe, and small instances of everyday joy. They represented who she was now, an independent, resilient woman capable of finding happiness even after so much pain. As she lay down that night, Samantha smiled to herself. The path she had walked had been difficult, but she had walked it with courage. And for the first time she knew the future was hers, without limits, without shadows, only possibilities. The dawn in the coastal town was a quiet spectacle, a renewed promise that arrived each day with the first touch of light on the water. Samantha woke before sunrise, as had become her habit, and prepared her favorite coffee. The aroma of cinnamon and vanilla filled the small house she had turned into a home. In the kitchen, a shelf held a collection of notebooks, each filled with recipes, ideas for the cafe, or reflections she had penned over the past months. Writing had become a cherished ritual, a way to piece together her story, page by page. That morning, Samantha felt especially at peace. The day before, Mare Serena had celebrated 6 months since its opening, and the cafe had become more than a business. It was a place of connection, where she created memories untied to Mackenzie or Susan. It was hers, entirely hers. After getting dressed, she slipped on a light sweater and walked toward the beach, carrying a mug of hot coffee. The air was crisp, and the gentle sound of waves filled the space around her. Few people were awake at that hour, making the moment even more special. At the shoreline, Samantha removed her shoes and felt the cool sand beneath her feet. Each step brought her closer to the water, which reflected the sky in soft hues of lilac and gold. She stopped near the edge, where the waves lapped at the sand, holding the mug with both hands as she gazed at the horizon. In that moment, she thought about the person she had been before everything fell apart, the woman who believed her life was perfect, built on a foundation of love and trust. She realized that version of herself wasn't entirely lost, but transformed. The pain had left scars, yes, but it had also shaped her, making her stronger and more self-aware. Samantha took a deep breath, the salty scent of the sea filling her lungs. As the sun rose, casting everything in golden light, she smiled. It was a calm, contented smile, as if the universe had finally returned something it had taken from her, a sense of freedom. She turned and walked along the sand, watching her footprints slowly fade beneath the waves. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. She knew the past would always be part of her story, but it didn't need to define her. With each step, she felt more grounded in the present, more in control of herself. When she returned home, Samantha paused on the porch for a moment, looking at the small garden she had started planting. The cafe and the garden, she thought, were like her, something that required care, patience, and love to flourish. She went inside and picked up the notebook where she recorded her thoughts. On the first page, she wrote a simple line: "Not every storm destroys. Some only clear the way." Samantha closed the notebook, placed it back on the shelf and returned to her work. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities. And now, more than ever, she was ready to embrace them. Now tell me, would you be able to forgive a double betrayal as devastating as the one Samantha faced? Or do you believe that some wounds can never heal? Share your opinion in the comments about what you would do in her place. And if you missed the last story we shared, here's what happened. Trapped in a suffocating relationship, Kristen was forced by Brendan to donate blood frequently to keep Melanie, her half-sister, alive. Even with her body weakened and exhaustion mounting, she gave in to her husband's demands, craving recognition and affection. However, a devastating truth comes to light, plunging Brendan into a remorse that arrives too late. Check out this gripping story now by clicking on the video appearing on your screen. See you there.